In an exclusive conversation with WION Samarpita Das, three-time Grammy-winning champion Ricky Cage talks about the origin of his ideas and love for music. Watch.
In 2015, I won my first Grammy Award for the album Winds of Samsara. And for the next 7 years, it was always in my mind that I need to make a follow-up to that album. But I had such a relentless touring schedule and traveling schedule. Every year I was doing 70 concerts in more than 13 or 14 countries. So there was no way for me to sit down in a very concentrated manner, in a focused manner in a studio and actually create a new album. But then 2020, the pandemic hit and we all were forced to be indoors. So that is when I started making the first few pieces of music that would go on to becoming Divine Tides. And I needed a collaborator for that album because I felt that I cannot do this alone. The vision that I have in mind is that I need a very strong musician like myself to work on this album with me. And growing up, I've been a huge, massive fan of Stuart Copeland, the founder drummer of The Police. Sold 75 million copies of his albums. He had already won 5 Grammys up until then. So I thought that what's the worst? He'll just say no. So I sent him an email and I showed him some pieces of music and I said that would you like to come with me on this journey, of making this album. And to my surprise, he loved the music and he said, yes, let's do this music together. Released the album was very successful. We got nominated for a Grammy Award and I hadn't even met him in person. So that is the way the world is today. Of course, it's a surreal experience growing up in India, making independent music which is not considered to be mainstream music and creating my own brand of music. I never even imagined it. It was an unattainable dream, something that we could not even think about, actually winning a Grammy Award. I used to watch the Grammy Awards on television and that was the end of it and that was all. So the only kind of music that I make now is about the environment and positive social impact around those areas. I grew up in North Carolina in a very small town known as Roanoke Rapids. And while growing up over there, our house was sort of in the middle of nowhere. There were a lot of wooded areas and forest areas around us. And we would have a whole lot of creepy crawly animals, as they say, like snakes and lizards and chameleons and frogs and, all insects which would come into our home on a regular basis. And for me, when I would look at these insects and when I would look at these so-called seemingly dangerous animals, I used to not think of them as being something that I had to kill immediately or I had to run away from. I used to look at these animals as almost being like my brothers and sisters. So I've always been an environmentalist. Environment has always been in my mind. I've always been two things in my life, a musician and an environmentalist. But even though I used to constantly make music about the environment, not all of my music was reflecting that. I was doing other music, like as I mentioned, commercials for television and radio, music for the World Cup opening ceremony, all of that stuff. And I was also doing some music in the environment. So after I won my first Grammy Award, that time Prime Minister Modi had invited me for a meeting. And what I thought was going to be a 5-minute meeting ended up being an hour-long discussion. And we discussed about the environment because he was going to be visiting the Paris Climate Change Conference, later that year. So he told me about that. He told me he's going to be launching the Solar Alliance. We spoke a lot about our philosophies on climate change and what we need to do to mitigate the effects of climate change. So that is when, the Prime Minister Modi encouraged me that I should be focusing my music and my life only on this because I'm so passionate about it and make my whole career about this. And that is when I decided that every piece of music that I make is going to be about the environment and about social causes and social impact around those areas. So when it comes to creative blocks and especially when it comes to musicians is when you are working on a deadline. So the only reason why you would have a creative block is that you're working on a deadline and you're working on somebody else's sensibilities. Like for example, if you're doing film music, a director comes to you and says that such and such is the situation. Like for example, 5 villains walk into a bar and there is a bar girl dancing, you know. So that is your situation. And it has to be a mix of hip hop, it has to be a mix of this, it has to have a little bit of Sufi touch. So all of these things. When it is not based on your own sensibilities and you're trying to think in terms of somebody else's sensibilities and what they will like or a whole audience will like, and when you are working on a deadline where they say that you have to have delivery of this within 3 days, we need this particular song, that is where you have creative blocks.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.